Welcome to the Modern Mythos Podcast, a show dedicated to keepers and players of the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game and other investigative horror games. I'm Seth Skorkowski.
And I'm John Hook, and together we'll discuss writing, game mastering, and player tips, and how you can apply them to your table. Today we're talking about our favorite inspirational books, movies, and music, and we're also reviewing Blackwater Creek, an introductory sandbox scenario written by Scott Dorward.
Well, we've done ones talking about movies. We did that ones with Mike Mason
Yes.
before. Kind of initially, I was like, "Well, this is there," but it's like, at least we get to talk about different books and different shows, and specifically inspiration. Now, I do admit I cheated on my homework assignment here. I added a little bit more investigation to it, and part of that is I link investigation with horror
Oh,
personally. Like even even
yeah.
though even though there is definitely survival horror and in different types, but for me, whenever I think of Call of Cthulhu, uh, I see it as investigation and then horror. So oh, that's just how my brain works.
I know, I totally agree because some of the most engaging horror games and horror media, whether it's in books or movies or whatever, or video games, is you're presented with a horror, and yes, there's the survival of it, but then there's also the investigation of where the characters are trying to figure out how to stop the horror. How can we prevent the horror? Is there a
you
way
know,
that this
what,
can all go
why is this
away?
happening? How do I
Why is it
stop it?
happening?
Yeah,
Yeah, and
or just like,
so
what happened to Carl? Uh,
right, right. Yeah, so I totally agree. Investigation is inherent with so much horror. Uh, and so, yeah, I thought it might be fun to kind of talk about some of the things that we enjoy,
mhm.
books, movies, music, whatever it might be, that you can, draw upon to get more horror. I have a author that I am just absolutely in love with all of his
Oh,
work so far.
stop.
Well, there is, just below
Oh, okay.
Skorkowski is John Langan, and he's written a lot of stuff. He's written a lot of short story anthologies. He's also participated in other anthologies that are put together. So he's got a few short stories in those, and he's got some novels that he's written. One of the novels that he's written that I just freaking love is The Fisherman.
Yep. I think
Uh,
you were the one that recommended when I read that one. So I'm pretty sure that
yeah,
was you. Being that you're such a fan, it probably was.
probably,
So I have
probably.
done that one.
And The Fisherman, I mean, it has. I'm not going to try and spoil and dissect the entire novel, but I mean, it has cosmic horror in it, but it also has zombie horror, but it also has real, personal, human horror, like things
Oh
that can
yeah.
happen in real life that are utterly horrific for a person to go through, and Langan is describing these experiences, and there's just so much I think you can take from the way that he's doing these descriptions, and
Its
carry them
depiction
to the
of
game
grief
table.
is gut wrenching. It's not really a
Utterly.
spoiler. It's about a pair of widowers who basically go out trying to find obscure fishing holes, and things happen. But the opening, I guess, third of that is so real. It is so grounded in the real world, but with personal tragedy. And it's to get you to know these characters and where they come from, and histories that will be very important later on. But my God, that to me was the most uncomfortable. Once the supernatural started and that filtered my brain of like, this isn't real, kicked on.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I was fine, but the actual realistic just depictions of horror and loss was the part that I found the most troubling, the just to deal with, because it's very real.
Yeah, it's very, very real. And I just think that if you want to get a sample on some of the ways that you can bring atmosphere to your table, read some John Langan. I was also going to point out that he's got a collection of short stories that I'm enjoying currently. I'm reading through called Wide Carnivorous Sky. That's the title of the anthology. It's also the title of one of the stories in the anthology. And that particular story is a vampire story. And holy crap, he does an amazing job of doing this new, at least I thought it was a new treatment of this vampire. Because the thing's coffin is in orbit and it comes out and dives down to planet side to basically kill, and then it goes back up into orbit. And these guys, and it's set in modern day, and these guys are like Afghani, well, they're Americans who were in the Afghan war who survived this attack, and now they're kind of psychically linked to it, and they've decided to try and kill this thing. And just the way they go about trying to do this is freaking awesome. But just the way that he describes this vampire or vampiric creature again is something I think is new that players can, or game masters can kind of key in on and find ways to bring something fresh to the table. So, as a game master, I can't recommend John Langan any higher. He's an amazing author.
Wow, that sold me on that. Now, one that I actually just revisited as basically, I ride the bike, and it's like, let me watch something I've seen before. Is I just watched Archive 81
Mm-hmm.
again, and uh, I really, really loved that show on Netflix. And some of the things I liked about it is I love the urban horror, which kind of in the vein of Rosemary's Baby, of the you move into the apartment and there is the cult, but it's in a very urban environment. And there is so a lot of people have told me that I should check out there's a Delta Green campaign that evidently has a lot of similarities to that, and I am absolutely blank. Impossible Landscapes. I haven't read it, but I've heard there's a lot of similarity. But one of the things I really like about Archive 81 is the depiction of the cult. One, they have this breathing thing they do, this just kind of weird breathing pattern. So, because we always depict it as like, oh, the cultists are chanting, and they don't chant. They do this bizarre breathing exercise, and that to me is 100 times creepier than if they had been chanting in some made up language,
Mm-hmm.
because it it was just alien. It was very strange of all of them breathing in this weird thing in unison and then stopping at this exact moment. Uh, it was kind of like the hairs on the back of your neck go up. And I also enjoyed when they would find out what the cultist motivations were. One of it was a woman, looking for her old lover. Another was a woman who just all she wanted was a baby. That's all she wanted. And because normally when we depict cultists, there's like, I want power and I want money and rule the world. And but what they gave them were much more uh, real things, things that I can much easier understand than the nebulous concept of power, versus I just want a child, and science has failed me, and this is how I'm going to go.
Right. I mean, that is such a more believable motivation, especially if because we're trying to put ourselves into that character's mindset. And so if you're this broken person and you're looking around and you're saying, what's wrong with me that society, these other people, they get to have children or they get to have, whatever small measure of happiness or Americana or whatever it is that they're getting. You see it. You see these other people who you think
Mhm.
are your peers, or if you're really twisted, you're thinking are, lower than you, and they're achieving these things that you can't achieve, like having a baby. The motivation for something like that becomes, it feels even more sinister because it's not some nebulous thing like, I want ultimate power. What is ultimate power? You
It's
know?
very relatable, and especially if when you find out what they're willing to do these horrible things for something that other people take for granted.
Yeah,
And the other thing I liked about it is, have you seen Archive 81?
I have.
Okay, when we did the 1920s occult ceremony for the comet, and it is the biggest flapper thing. They've got the stupid celebratory hats. So there's like a jazz band in the corner, and they're goofy. And there's like a big banner hanging down welcoming the comet. And I'm like, I have been doing my cult celebrations completely wrong. This looks like the most badass party of just pure 1920s, just rolling 20s awesomeness. They've got these just beautiful outfits, but and then they go down and they summon this monster. But it's before that, it is like, they're not all in robes, and it's not like they're slowly contemplating what they will get when they awaken the demon. They're all like, hell yeah, the comet's in town, everybody. And they hire a band. It's wonderful because that is actually kind of real. When you've
Yeah.
got like these wealthy people, like, what do you do to celebrate this? Well, you hire a band and you throw a party. That's what you do, and you've got a neat little hat that looks like it's got a comet on it. Yeah, and it added those little things to it. I really enjoy. The rest of the series I loved, but when it came to those aspects and using them in a game, I found those really eye opening because they're very obvious, but for some reason, that's not normally how I've seen it depicted or how I've depicted it in different games. And I think it mixes things up, but it also makes it at the same time seem more real.
Hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. Uh, I was trying to. I really wanted to also try and include in this list music, and it was actually, I don't know. This was a little more challenging for me. So, but I did think of something that I do enjoy, which is "Darkest of the Hillside Thickets." I love their music. Hell, they've allowed us to use their song "Gluttony" as our opening and closing theme song for this
Yeah.
show. But they've got a wide range of albums, and one particular album is "Let Sleeping Gods Lie." They actually produced that one in conjunction or in partnership with, I should say, in partnership with Wizards of the Coast for the 5e kind of launch with Cthulhu. I
Hmm.
think it was Sandy Peterson's 5e Cthulhu book, right? Um,
Oh,
and so Wizards of the Coast and having the Cthulhu mythos in a 5e rule set. I think it's a really clever album. All of the tracks on it are extremely Cthulhu mythos focused. All the titles on the tracks are invoking the mythos, and but it's neat to listen to an album like that because you get a different sense of the mythos through something like music. It's the tempo, it's the lyrics, and the way that it just kind of speaks to you. It can bring a new perspective that you can harness and put into your game. In fact, the it's my understanding. I only have it as digital files, so I don't have a CD copy. But I believe the liner notes. My understanding is that the liner notes will tell you, give you suggestions on how you can use the tracks in different scenarios. So I thought that was kind of neat.
That's brilliant. Um, when it came to things like music, I always did stuff like Nox Arcana, different things. But for inspiration, I guess I'm weird. A lot of times, stuff like lyrics distract me from it.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always done more instrumental for that sort of thing. I, I actually always really enjoyed the Metallica Call of Cthulhu song or
Oh
Cthulhu,
yeah.
uh, which is like just an 8 minute instrumental
Mm-hmm.
with a very ominous, uh, final part when he rises. But and I pretty much have always stuck to that. And this is not Call of Cthulhu. It was when I started getting into Traveler that I discovered a band, Slough Feg, that has an entire concept album about Traveler,
Ah.
and it's which is called Traveler, which is about being a space pirate, the Spinward Marches, and all of this, fighting the Zodani, and that one actually really did pull me into like deeper aspects of the world. But I've never had it with the Cthulhu things. I think it's because there is so much that I didn't have to go deep in any of it. Versus with that one, I was like, I think this is the collection of the only songs ever related to this game. So I
Right.
had to dive all the way. It wasn't a very wide pool. So it was kind of mine. It's like it's not really the same genre, John, but I understand what you mean. And since I'd hit on it earlier, of course there's Rosemary's Baby uh, by Ira Levin, where going back to the idea of the urban horror, where it's in New York, very 1960s. Of course, there's the very famous Polanski film based off of it, which is exceedingly exact. It very strictly follows the book. Like
Oh, I did not know that. Okay.
evidently, so Polanski was actually very new at the time, and he evidently kind of thought he did. So uh, he tried to get it so precise the book. Like at one part, like the husband is reading a newspaper, and he basically called up the author and was like, "Hey, which newspaper stuff was?" And the author's like, "I don't know. I just said he was, you know, doing this." And so it actually is very, very, very uh, precise, at least as far as what's filmable. And I really liked that one because especially at the end, the cultists are just regular people, and there's that they're slowly drawing uh, basically these young women in to be the mother of the devil, of their god,
Mm-hmm.
and but they do it through it's very trusting, and how they kind of pull those threads and how they have kind of slowly manipulated all of these things where they get the husband to help his acting career. He goes along with this, and and the whole time Rosemary's thinking she's going crazy, and then the sudden realization that she isn't paranoid. All of these people really are out to get her for all of their own little personal agendas and all their own personal stuff. And this whole time, she'd go to her husband and say, "I'm not trusting this," and he'd just, of course, bounce her right back into that direction because they had gotten to everyone around her, and the people they couldn't, they took out. And I thought that is what makes it once again very creepy because a lot of times we do horror, we always get pictured out in a rural environment, the hill people doing hill people stuff, which we'll get to Blackwater Creek soon. And I do enjoy it when it's very much not. And then kind of bounce off that since up to Polanski. The Ninth Gate was another big one for me. It's their
Oh,
depiction
right.
of cults. That was part of his kind of series on I forget what he called it, but it had to deal with basically city
Mm-hmm.
supernatural stories. The book that it's based on, the Dumas Club, not too similar at all. It's actually about some a club that loves Alexander Dumas, and they've got copies of the original Three Musketeers, and this Ninth Gate thing is like the subplot.
Yeah,
It's yeah, because when I went to the book, it was like, wow, this is slightly related. But
that's funny. I think I have a copy of Rosemary's Baby. I need to read it. It's something I think I just picked up because of the movie and everything, but I didn't realize that the movie was so true to the book. And if I remember right, because I've only seen the movie once, maybe twice, but a really long time ago. Not only is it urban, but isn't everybody in the same building?
yeah,
Like if she and her husband had just gotten a different apartment in a different building, they would have been safe. But they were
yeah,
in that building with those neighbors, and that was the downfall.
yeah, and that's kind of one of the things I liked about like Arcade 81. It was like the building is on it. And this tenant who has no idea or begins to suspect, but has no idea how deep this goes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but they're useful to this cult's purposes, and things might have been manipulated to get them there. So I really enjoy that because it's once again we're in a you've got bright lights, there's lots of people, all of the stuff that normally you don't think of horror in that way, but it definitely is.
I've been doing a lot of reading, so I also recently finished another book, "The Color Out of Time" by Michael Shea, and I one of my favorite, actually, I would say my favorite Lovecraft story is "The Color Out of Space." There's just something amazing about that alien horror story because the creature is so utterly non-human.
Yeah,
It's not a an allegory for some other human trope. I mean, it is just completely non-human, and with non-human motivations and just everything about it. And I think it's amazing. I really thought it was very clever in the way that it was written and executed. I really like that story, and apparently so did the author Michael Shea, because he did basically what's a sequel called "The Color Out of Time."
so I'm not familiar with this one.
It's an older book. I mean, Michael Shea is deceased. I mean, so this is an older story. Actually, I don't remember the copyright. I can just check real quick.
You mentioned it was
84.
84. Okay.
So so it was done in the 80s, and the story is written as if it is modern. So it is in the 80s. The technology that's being used by the characters is very modern. You period appropriate, right? 80s technology.
Yeah.
But it's a I found it to be a really refreshing way because it does have a slight I don't want to say a change to the creature, but it's almost as if Shea kind of like took it to that next step. Um, you know, in Color Out of Space, the creature is basically brand new to Earth. It just crashed, right?
Yeah, there's that
It
the rock would slowly kind of evaporate.
evaporated,
Yeah.
and it's still fairly brand new to Earth. Well, now this is set, years later. It's like 50 years later, and it's had a long time to soak in and take in the environment and grow. And it's just how an alien creature like that, how it could mature and what it might be like if it's had a chance to, really take root in a certain environment. And I thought Michael Shea did just a fantastic job in doing that. I greatly enjoyed the book, Color Out of Time. So, specifically, it was about one type of creature, one Lovecraftian creature, the color. But it was really interesting. So, if you're
Well,
going
when
to
it
use
when it,
colors in your game, read this.
well, when it comes to doing like kind of a modern uh, retelling or sequel to a Lovecraft story, one author that I've really enjoyed was Ruthanna Emrys, who did Wintertide, and it's not modern; it is 1950s is the setting for it, and it is a sequel, or actually, it's a series that's a sequel to The Shadow over Innsmouth, and it follows the Deep Ones much later. So, the Shadow of Innsmouth, they are taken to the internment camps at the very beginning. When he talks about like, oh, and they were hauled off, and he called them concentration camps. And in this one, it is about they're in the desert as they are transforming into deep ones because they're essentially aquatic. A lot of them are dying of thirst. They're drying out. They're dying. Except there are two children who were young enough that they were basically able to last a long time through this. And then just one day, they opened up the gates and they stuck a bunch of Japanese people in there because World War II had started. And once the war was done and they basically opened up the camps and they kicked everyone out, these two deep ones who are now, I guess, in their like late teens, early 20s or so, kind of went
Mm-hmm.
out with them, and they're now living with their adopted family in San Francisco, and the government is aware of them. And in Wintertide, they are contacted by basically the person who's supposed to watch them, I guess from the CIA or someone, who says, "We believe the Russians have got somebody at Miskatonic who's trying to find some of the records from Innsmouth, and we need you, we need your help." And I found the whole book to be it's very true to Lovecraft, but at the same time, it is a very interesting reinterpretation of how all of the mythos work together in conjunction. So it doesn't just have deep ones. There is, a spoiler, but we do have one of the great race is involved, so we get to interact with the great race. I enjoyed it a lot, so I found it a cool twist.
Yes, I am reading it right now, so I'm still very early in the book, and I don't think there's too much of a spoiler about there being a great race of Yith because our heroine, who is a deep one, is working at a bookstore. Charlie is her boss and friend, and Charlie, who runs this old used eclectic bookstore, he really wants to learn magic, and I'm blanking on the heroine's name, but she knows a little bit and is teaching him a little bit, and they have conversations about there are different schools of magic, not really schools of magic, but different ways to approach magic, and the Yithians have their way, and it's so funny because for a long time she doesn't actually come out and say who she is or what her people are, and Charlie, for a long time thinks that she is a Yithian until she finally like admits like, I'm not a Yithian, I'm of the water, I'm from the deep, I'm the water people. And he's like, oh, and he just kind of pivots. He's like, yeah, all right, that's kind of cool, and they just kind of start going on from there. So knowing that there are Yithians to discover in this novel, I don't think that's going to be too much of a spoiler. So I'm
It's something
super
to look
looking
forward
forward
to.
to it. I'm still diving in and reading. I'll do some more reading of it tonight.
No, but her. that book I found kind of a fascinating thing, and then I used some of that, at least that approach to deep ones when I did A Mother's Love, in the New Tales of Mistanic Valley, because my goal was I wanted to humanize them. Uh, so the mother's love, the mother is the deep one, and they've got these relationships and all of this, and that was because I had read Winter Tide, and I loved that depiction of them. So, but that's a direct example of I did this book, and this was what I wrote as a result of kind of a different angle at looking at Lovecraft's world. Still true to it, but also extremely different.
Mm,
So I enjoyed that quite a bit.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Um, more inspiration. I love ghost stories. I love ghost stories. I didn't put it on the list, but I think Stephen King's Bag of Bones is a fantastic book. It's one of the best ghost story books I've read in a long time. And when it comes to ghost stories and the way to present ghosts, I absolutely loved the Netflix adaptation of The Haunting of Hill House, that series.
Oh yeah, no, I watched that.
My understanding is that it's vastly different from the book. I have not read the Shirley Jackson novel.
I haven't either. So, but it wouldn't surprise me if it would be vastly different. But
Yeah, I heard it's
uh,
vastly different.
that was one I do remember. The kind of the middle of that series kind of fell for the trap of it. Felt like they were stretching it out, but the scene with the reveal about the crooked necked lady was one of the most perfect moments in just about any horror uh, show that I've watched. I mean, it was so like just oh my god, just wonderful. So that that moment, because it requires all the setup for
All the
several
setup.
episodes, is so
Yeah.
beautiful in how it elicits a very good response from people. So just
I agree. It
off that
is one
alone,
of the yeah, it's one of the best reveals, and the way that they were able to then reintegrate all of the previous sightings of her
oh yeah,
in the reveal portion, and you're like, "Oh my god, it all made sense." But
and it is
yeah,
so fast because it
mm-hmm,
rapid fires through them. So like
rapid
about the
fire.
time, so your brain is racing to catch up as you're kind of grasping what it's been telling you this whole time. They don't make it slow. They don't rush past it where it's too fast. Just absolute perfect execution. Loved that review.
And there's so much with that. I mean, the way that they treat just benevolent background ghosts. I want to find a way to integrate that type of atmosphere at the game table where there's just a shadowed figure that stands at the in a dark corner of a far room, and all they're doing is standing and watching, and they don't do anything, and
My
then when you click
favorite
on the light they're gone.
was the guy repairing the clock.
Yes.
That to me, out of all the ghostly stuff, that was my favorite one because when the father is telling the story of it, points it out like right there, because the son's like, no, it wasn't. It's like we never hired anyone to repair the clocks, and
Right. Yeah, because the son had written a book. Yeah, the son had
yeah,
written that book. The dad read the book and said, "Hey, son, I read your book. You saw a ghost and didn't even realize it." And talked about that.
so I do like the supernatural being something that is mistaken for being completely just background stuff. So yeah, but for me it was definitely the guy repairing the clock because even when he passes them, I even remember at the times like seeing the guy repairing the clock, and then later when they reference it, like, oh, that's good. I like that.
because we all saw him. We all saw him and didn't think twice about it, you know, because he
No,
didn't have a skull face or something like that,
no,
you
he
know.
wasn't even doing anything weird. It was
Nope.
just doing that clock on the stairway.
I also love, and this is a way I think you could mine this show, The Haunting of Hill House, and bring it to the game table. Is the house itself is alive and haunted, and it manifests that in the way that it interacted with each of the children. So if you remember from the show, there was that one room with the red door,
Oh yeah.
and no one had a. It's like nobody had a key to get into that red door, but it's the house itself that keeps opening and closing the door, and the house would put children into like a fugue state, and they would enter into that room not
Always see
realizing that
something
they entered
different.
it. The door would shut, and each child had a different room that met their needs. You know, the young boy Luke had a treehouse. The older brother, he found a crafts room, and that's where he found that one like bureau or makeup table that he painted for his mother. He retrieved it from that room. But the one girl had a dance studio. But it was always the same room. It just reshaped itself and remade itself to the psyche of each character that was in there. And I would love to be able to try and emulate that in a game where, depending upon who goes into a certain room, it presents in a different way, you know?
Oh, that would be tricky. I think that could be done, but that'd be tricky. But yeah, no, I love that aspect as well of just the way the house was manipulating them very subtly and very slowly. And oh man, so whenever I think about that, I always think about the bent neck lady. I was like, oh god, so such
Love
a
it.
wonderful
So good.
wonderful reveal. Now, I would not be allowed to actually discuss the topic of inspirational books without having to touch on The Devil Rides Out, which I think I mentioned in like at least 50% of our episodes.
That's true.
But and a part of what I liked about that is one, we've got the time capsule quality of it. Was written in the 1930s. So the author will point out things that I think a modern author writing about the 1930s wouldn't, just because they're not actually in the 1930s. They don't know some of those details. But to me, that was also just the perfect Call of Cthulhu scenario where if they had fantastic credit ratings, because the first requirement for that one is you have to be one of the characters in that. But when they find out they're up against this cult, the first thing he does is like, okay, well, I'm going to the library, and I'm going to have to research all this stuff. And so one of the heroes just runs off to the library. He's gone for the whole day, just researching how they're supposed to fight this evil. I was just like, well, that's the most Call of Cthulhu thing ever. Like, we're up against murdering Satanists to the library. And then part of it is I enjoyed the cars. Like, it's Hispano Suiza as they're doing this elaborate car chase across the countryside. But because they don't have cell phones, because they don't have any of this, they have set it up to where when they would get to the next town, they would call someone to get the updates that everyone else is doing, because there's basically three car chases going on, and they were reporting as to where all of them were. And it's kind of a creative way of dealing with certain things that we wouldn't even think about now, as far as where is everyone doing? How are we getting the updates? Is he had basically hired these people to follow certain cars and find out where they were to pinpoint where the cult's meeting place was. And so we've got that. We end up having to go to Stonehenge. We've got the famous scene of them in the ring as the bad guys are throwing the supernatural against them. And then we're off to Paris and finding a temple in Paris. And then we're off to Greece we have to hop on an airplane. We have to fly to Greece to get it to get this ancient artifact. And to me, that's like this is a sprawling Call of Cthulhu adventure. If we just
It's
remove
Masks
these
of
Satan parts,
Nyarlathotep.
oh yeah, but it's this 1930s just great time. Now it's still got all the problems of being an old dated book, but you've got your old, you've got your racism, your sexism, your classism, um, and Dennis Wheatley talked about it was clearly Dracula was an inspiration. Actually, he talked about kind of like the Three Musketeers because of our four heroes, and other people compared it to Dracula, and it's a lot more Dracula to me. Like I think he really did scrape the serial numbers off of some of Bram Stoker's notes as far as we have the older gentleman who is like way cooler and way smarter and way more refined and way more badass than everybody. His only fault is he's just old, which we've got that. But also in Dracula, Mina, if you read the book, was the one that saved the day. Mina was the smartest damn one of them, uh, which in all of the film versions of it, Mina's usually the damsel in distress. But in the book, it was like, oh, she's the one that figured out how to do this, and she did all this stuff in the background while the boys were off banging their chests. She's like, okay, guys, let me solve this problem for you. And then she does it, and they're like, well, thanks, little lady, and they go off and do their thing. But it's like she was kind of the big key versus being the object of Dracula's affections, and that's all she is, and usually film. And Wheatley also has that as well with the female character, who is very very Mina. So pretty much take the exact same characters, including the Texan, who's bigger than life. It's the same characters, just in the 1920s or 30s. So, but that one to me was one of my biggest inspirations, and I think that's part of the reason why I have always leaned more into that sort of adventure horror than doing the pure Lovecraftian. Is because when I read The Devil Rides Out, it was about the time I was getting interested in Call of Cthulhu, and it was like, holy crap, this is what I want them to be like, because it was a group. Versus when you read Lovecraft, it's usually a person telling the
Yes.
story,
Yeah.
versus a team. And but they don't certainly get in car chases in luxury cars across the countryside and go to these exotic locations and hop in their private plane and fly around and have to get past customs. They're usually in some single location, and that's those are great stories. But when I was trying to figure how do I do this as a game with like 4 or 5 players, that's what I ended up leaning on, and I think that's really what flavored how I've actually always approached the game since. So I would have to recommend The Devil Rides Out by Dennis Wheatley.
I like it. I like it. I think I did finally pick up a copy. I just haven't read it yet, so I will get
Well,
through
do that once you read me through the code.
that. If there's a Modern Mythos bingo card, mentioning the code is on that. It's like center square on that. Okay,
That I think I have to mention Cyberpunk, and I think we've got like a bingo
there you go.
somewhere because I think we've hit most of them right in this
Yeah,
conversation.
Dennis Wheatley, the code, and Cyberpunk. That's the trifecta right there. Something else that I've been loving on Netflix is that series Love, Death, Robots, the
Oh yeah.
animated series. And there is a lot of different stories in there. Some are very humorous, and some are full of wonder, and there is some great horror in there.
Oh yeah.
Now, just obvious off the, as we're having this conversation, I'm sure people are thinking about the most recent season. I think it's season 3, and there is it feels like it's a direct Delta Green style story in there
I haven't
where
done season 3 yet, so yeah, just like tell me
well, then
about it. Like,
I'm not going to talk about it because there's an amazing episode in season 3 that is like totally Delta Green. But the reason why I wanted to bring this up is in one of the earlier seasons, and I forget exactly which one, and I forget what the name of the scenario was, but it was sci-fi, and this character is is well, he thinks he's alone. Well, actually, no, he doesn't think he's alone. He thinks he has like one other companion he can talk to, and this, and everything seems very isolated. They did a jump. The ship did a jump, and it basically like missed its jump, and it's lost. And um, the thing that I found absolutely amazing about this, and I again, this is another aspect, something I want to try and get into a game, emulate and bring into a game, is your protagonist is in a situation that was accidental. They're in a location and they got there accidentally and they want to try and get out, or they want to try and be rescued, and they're not alone. And the person that's with them, who seems to be trustworthy, is actually not, because the person that's with them is actually an ancient monster,
The alien intelligence.
the alien intelligence, which in this case was very spider like. And now the person who's been trapped, they're actually a fly in that web. And the realization comes, finally the veil is dropped and they actually see the true form of the creature. And then that's when the sanity is shattered and everything. And I want to try and do that in a game as well, where the characters end up in a location that's unintended, and that's the mystery. They got to figure a way out before a clock runs out, and then the entity will have been, it'll have its opportunity to reveal itself, and then basically come for them. I think that could be a lot of fun. That seems like it would
Oh,
be a good convention
that's kind of a
scenario.
tricky one, but I think if you could pull that off, it'd be brilliant. Um, Another one that I recently enjoyed, I need to revisit this one, was 30 Coins on HBO, which is Spanish uh, horror in kind of a small village. Have you seen 30 Coins yet?
I have, and I
Okay.
mean, to say it's Spanish, it's Spain
Oh,
Spanish,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
which a lot of times I think a lot of Americans will think of, Mexico, right? They think Spanish, they think Hispanic, and they're thinking
Oh,
like, oh, it's Mexico
no,
or something
it's
like that.
very European.
Yeah, it's very European. It's Spain.
And the first episode, I remember it struck me because it is very Dunwich horror. And it's the scene, I think, when they go to the house, the woman is so proud of her baby, and you see the baby, and it's just, I don't know, it's like I think it was about 4 feet tall, but it still had like those baby features kind of like you see it from behind, and it was so unsettling, that I think that depiction was probably more horrifying than if it had been a big oozy tentacle monster,
Yeah, well,
because
and not only that, the baby had uh, enhanced the environment to suit its needs, and I thought that was super creepy because it used what was available to it, which was yarn. And
oh
so
yeah,
there was just yards and yards of just yarn webbing hanging all throughout this house. And I'm like, you're like watching this thing going, what is going on? And it was creating a web
oh yeah, and
for
then
this crazy
the
baby.
spider. But
Yeah.
I enjoyed that one a lot, because there was also, you've got the town, they isolate the town eventually, and then we can't get out, and all the creepiness and the madness, and this is where the cult descends on this town where people are trapped as it's just becoming more and more insane. So I enjoyed 30 Coins quite a bit.
Me too.
uh, I
There was like
recommend.
three sightings of the yellow sign in the series.
I don't know if I noticed the yellow sign.
Are you kidding me? Oh
Yeah,
my
might have.
god, there
Well, I
was
mean, no,
like,
yeah,
yeah,
well, at the top shows up, but like
yes.
that one you couldn't possibly ever miss. But I don't, I don't remember if
Yeah,
I
We have
Noticed
to.
the
You
yellow
have to see
sign.
it again. There's like three sightings of the yellow, like the yellow sign as you think of it from Chaosium, right?
Huh.
And my understanding is that the director is a huge Call of Cthulhu role playing game fan, plays the game, loves it so much, and really infused that into 30 coins, which my understanding is season 2 should be coming soon.
I've heard they've greenlit it, and with the director, I've heard that yes, he has written Call of Cthulhu snares, but they're in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so because some of the forums had talked about, it, like, hey, is there any way we could maybe you know get
Get some
somebody to translate these
translations.
for us? Like,
Mm-hmm.
can we get a copy of this because we'd like to see what else he's done at actually for the game. So yeah, I don't know. I didn't even know that going in, so I
Yeah,
enjoyed that one quite a
I didn't
bit.
know it going. When I saw the first yellow sign, I was like, wait a second, something
I,
meta is going on here, and so then I kind of got into it and found out about how the director or creator of the show or somebody, primary writer, is huge into Call of Cthulhu, and was putting that in here. Another little trivia thing, if from 30 coins, um, uh, the mayor of the town and his wife,
mhm.
and they start to become estranged, as the mayor kind of starts falling in love with the vet, you know.
Yeah.
Well, the mayor's wife.
Uh huh.
Do you remember her?
Oh, I actually spent several episodes before I figured it out. I didn't have to go on IMDb,
I
but for the
am not
longest
as
time, I was like, "Who is she? Who
yeah.
is she? Who is that actress?"
I am not as clever as you are. I found out about it after the fact, like on social media, and then I was like dumbfounded. I was like being kicked by a mule. But yeah, she was in Stuart Gordon's Dagon as the
Princess. Yeah.
princess in Dagon. I was like, oh,
Oh, because it
dang.
was about 18 years or so of
Mm-hmm.
separation. So she's older, and it's but and I think the only role I've ever seen her in it was Dagon, which of course was filmed and took place in Spain. And but the whole time it's like she has those very large eyes, so she's
Yeah.
recognizable. So the whole time like she looks familiar, and I kept asking my wife like, where do we know her from? Where? And she's like, I don't know, man. And finally, I'm like, she made some expression or something, and it just all clicked. But it took me a couple episodes, and like from the moment I saw her, though, it's like she's familiar, but I can't possibly tell you where from.
Yeah.
And
I was completely clueless. But then after once I found out, I was like, oh, damn, why didn't I recognize her? So cool.
then I kind of have one on here that I also always associate with Call of Cthulhu, forever and always, and it has absolutely zero supernatural at all, and that is the Maltese Falcon novel,
All
of course,
right.
by Dashiell Hammett, but the very famous Humphrey Bogart film premiere, which is actually also very very true to the book. Um,
Okay.
they actually they originally made the film in 1931, but then the censorship laws came out, and it had a few scenes that were then considered a little bit too risque for films. So then they remade it, but as a comedy, like the Devil is a Lady or something in 1936, and everybody hated it. So then they remade it again in 19, I guess 41, 10 years after the first one. We've had three now, with Humphrey Bogart, and that one is perfect. Uh, Absolutely love the cast, the Sydney Greenstreet, and just spectacular. But what we have is our characters are all trying to chase the strange MacGuffin, which of course I always think of like in a game it'd be like the Cthulhu idol or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, and they are basically all circling in this kind of web of deception. As you've got your gritty PI who's caught in the middle of it all. So I actually personally always associate that with Call of Cthulhu, even though there is zero horror or supernatural at all.
Well, it pulls in the investigation. As we said right at the top of this, investigation is intimately linked with horror.
Also, I would say it does have some of the time capsule quality of just the time. Certain things like hotels having the hotel detectives, which
Mm-hmm.
because Sam Spade would come in, they have to talk to the hotel detective, and they all knew who he was, and all those little aspects that I really don't think about, just because I'm not really that familiar with the times. But a lot of modern authors that write about it, they actually aren't either. So a lot of details get lost versus someone at the time writing about it. That's just common knowledge. So they sprinkle those details in. And I also liked the fact that all of the characters are just kind of larger than life. There is a player character quality to them where they are all to some odd extreme of just very memorable. Because that's usually how I also see player characters is they're just like a little bit too much in whatever direction it is that they
Sure.
go, where it's like very distinct. So, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but like the total positive. But so all of the characters in that are like really unique. And whenever they are on camera, they own the camera, which was another thing that I enjoyed a lot about that film. The book is good, but the actual film, I actually prefer the film over the book in this one.
That's very cool. Very cool. Well, that was a pretty exhaustive list. Hopefully, there's something in there that you can use and reference to mine and make make your horror games a little more interesting, filled with horror, better
Well, I think
investigations.
it's always a mistake whenever you and I want to talk about like movies and shows and books because you and I could talk together about this for hours. And then once we're done recording, we're probably going to talk for another hour about it all. So, but we keep following for it. It's like, oh, we can talk about that for like 20 minutes. Like, when have we ever talked about that for 20 minutes?
Nothing. Nothing.
But with that, let's move on to our second topic. And we wanted to look at a Call of Cthulhu scenario, kind of review it. And this was actually one of the first scenarios I ran. It wasn't the first, but for our group, this was one of the earliest ones. It's Blackwater Creek by Scott Dorward, and is available at the Keeper Screen pack. It's a kind of a double adventure, Miss Dues and Blackwater Creek, and let's go over this one. How it's about 50 pages long.
Yeah, about 50 pages long, with around 33 of those, 32, 33 of just text. You've got six pre generated characters,
Always nice.
six, yeah, pretty nice, six, documented handouts. And actually, there's five really well designed area maps.
It's got a lot
Uh,
of maps in it.
and the maps are primarily of larger areas. It's not like you're getting a map of a house per se. You're getting, whole areas. So, good
Yeah,
maps.
like the farm. You just get images of the farm,
Mm-hmm.
not room by room breakdowns.
Not room by room breakdown. There's also the entire overland landscape of, this is the Blackwater Creek area, the
Mm.
forest, the river, where the cave is located, where the town is located, and the different roads that run through, and that kind of thing.
And and this is a very sandbox scenario. So basically, when the player characters they are given their mission that sends them to Blackwater Creek, which we'll talk about the missions that send them there in a second.
And this is full of spoilers. We're
Oh
gonna
yeah, pure
spoil the
spoilers
shit
by
out
the
of
way,
this.
pure
Pure
spoilers.
spoilers.
But once you get to Blackwater Creek, there isn't a you go here and then you go here and then you go here. In fact, the reason they're there doesn't even have to be any one specific thing. So
And that is, I think, a real achievement. I think Scott did an amazing job in creating a sandbox because when we think about a horror mystery investigation game, typically for that investigation, there's something about the mystery, and you need or typically we have a progression of clues. You have a clue trail that you
Mhm.
follow, and we normally express the clue trail through a series of encounters. You might have this encounter starts, and then this domino comes after that, and that domino comes after that. Now, of course, the trail could branch and go into a variety of different directions, and then all those varied branches would then come back together, typically in a primary, or one primary assumed conclusion with you know some variances and varieties of that. This scenario doesn't do that, doesn't follow that model, and I think that's one of the strengths of it.
No, and that's one of the things that really really caught my eye early on is so the first one that we can use to introduce our characters to it is the Miskatonic University team, and the backstory of the adventure is basically is a town that was destroyed long ago under mysterious circumstances, and Miskatonics basically sent an archaeology team out there see if they can find the remains of this old town that sat pretty much in the area where Blackwater Creek now is. Um, the lead guy found something strange, went into a cave that the old locals had destroyed, and basically awoke a kind of a portal to Shub-Niggurath, and his wife melded with it. He sent the kids home, and nobody's actually heard from him since. But this creek has become flowing through Blackwater Creek that is coming from the cave, but it is basically tainted with like her embryonic fluid or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's really weird, but the result is we've got a lot of people that are drinking this water, watering livestock off of it, crops being grown from it. And from one of those crops, there are some bootleggers who are using the corn to make whiskey. And that whiskey is now tainted. So the first hook is from the university, where basically we haven't heard from this professor in a while. School is starting, and we don't know where he is. We don't know where his wife is. So they send a group of investigators to Blackwater Creek to find him. But then, meanwhile, we have this totally other one that we could use instead, which is about bootleggers who have gotten their hands on some of this hooch that's got a powerful punch, and basically their boss, this mob don or something, is telling the player characters, "You got to go there. These are the bootleggers." He names who they are, and you need to get him to basically them to swear that they work for me now, and or find out what makes this stuff so special. So those are two completely different motivations to go there. One of them is to find this missing professor and his wife, and the other doesn't even know about the missing professor and his wife. That's like not even on their radar. They're just going straight to the bootleggers because they're basically going to say, "You work for us in our gang now. And what's your secret to this magic hooch?" Um, which is also really cool because we've got completely separate motivations at all. It's not like we're trying to get people from different directions to follow the same mystery. We're just sending them to the town over things related to the mystery. I think it's wonderful.
I really like it too. The scenario, the way it's written, is also really well done because it is just filled with keeper notes. You know,
Oh yeah.
hints and ideas, suggestions on how a novice keeper can run the scenario, use NPCs, present certain events from the different locations and get the characters or get the players involved. One of the things, though, that I think could be done a little differently is the scenario is presented in each location, of which I think there's like 9 different documented locations, and
Yeah.
each of those locations have several points of interest and possible events that are documented as well. For a novice keeper, I could see how that would be possibly a little bit overwhelming, and so maybe what could have been done as a further assistance for novice keepers is saying, here at this location, these 1 or 2 events should be mandatory. Run these for
Okay,
sure.
so kind of like highlights of
Highlights,
yeah of
because
location 4. Here are your highlights.
yeah,
Everything after this is pretty squishy, but this is definitely what you want to
bingo.
get across. No,
Yeah,
and
because
I actually enjoy when scenarios do that.
yeah, me too. Because so much of it is just the cornucopia, and you're allowed to take whatever you want. There could be that analysis paralysis for a new keeper to say, which one do I go for? Which one do should I present? And so I think with each location, having one that you might have as more priority, or you know, this one is mandatory and the other ones are optional, could have um, been that extra layer of assistance
Now,
to guide the new keepers.
so we've got the 9 locations, and basically we have a different scene that shows up the appendix, depending on which intro we want to do, either the university one or the criminal one. So basically, there's another bits in the back. It's like it's going to be one of these two, depending on how you want to run it. But then there's another one, and it actually was one of my favorite scenes when we ran it. And with the university one, if you interview the students who were at the expedition, basically there's 2 of them that are still at the school, and you can talk to them. They give you a little bit of information about, yeah, this stuff is going on, and a little bit of information. And then there was a third student who has basically he's checked out of school, and yes, he's doing it to take care of his mother. And when the player characters talk to him, he seems a little nervous and all that. And at some point, he basically gets up as is like, "Oh, hold on, I need to bring some tea up to my mother." And he makes tea and he takes it up there in a platter, and he comes down with this bowl of coagulated soup and this cup of tea that hasn't been drunk because his mother's been dead for years, but because he was corrupted by this, and there is that mother relation, he has hallucinated his mother being upstairs, and there is this kind of creepy vibe because the player characters don't know they're talking to someone who's absolutely delusional, and there is that kind of revelation. And when we played it, it worked great. So it did drop in the ear the foreshadowing of like mothers, but it was this this guy who's real helpful. Say, oh no, I had to come home take care of my mother, and but they look around the house. There's no pictures of her because she died, I think, when he was a child, and all this. So I actually really love this little kind of short, I guess, like half-page scene that
Mm-hmm.
just appears there. And it was actually one of my more cherished memories of running it was that we are now beginning to lay down the foundation of what happens to people that go to Blackwater Creek.
Yes, that's pretty awesome. I could see using that scene and maybe trying to up the creep factor on it because his mother has been dead for so long. Maybe he kidnaps women and brings them, and they're just bound up until they die of neglect, and then he has to go get another mother, and so
And another and
they're
another.
they're just piling up in that room.
And I think that could be done with the criminal one if a keeper changes an aspect of So at the beginning, they find out the name of the brothers and all of this. And I think it actually should be a tip to get to the guy who is actually delivering it. So basically, when they meet the crime boss, he is like, okay, like we found out that this dude is driving a truck back and forth to Blackwater Creek, and he or from wherever, and he's got the booze. We need to find out from him who his supplier is or something, and it could be this real friendly guy. But if you gave him that same quirk, where he has to take care of his mother, and even if the player characters threaten the mom, who's imaginary, he's like, okay, I'll tell you. It was these brothers and Blackwater Creek. So I think that scene could be incorporated into the other one if the characters have a reason to interview somebody who has been to Blackwater Creek and has left. So that's a little trick a keeper would have to do, but I think it's a beautiful foreshadowing.
I do too. That's really good. Yeah, there's just so much about this scenario that I really love. The with the sandbox scenario or the sandbox creation and how, depending upon what direction you come in, you get to do whatever it is that you want. I would one of the things that I would want to change is the as it's written, it's potentially the investigators' first experience with seeing some of the taint would be on the children who are in and kind of playing in Blackwater Creek town proper.
Yeah,
A lot of the kids scatter when the investigators come, but there's that brother and sister who are killing worms in a jar of tainted water, and they've got that look. It's not an Innsmouth look, but they've got the boils and the seepage and that kind of thing.
the thing is, and
And
the art makes it look a lot worse than it's supposed to be in the
right,
description.
right, yeah, I was thinking that too.
Because I think in the book they're all like 2 and 3 level, but when you look at the art, you're like, oh my god, they look like The Walking Dead.
It's stage 5 out of 4 stages. Um, yeah. So I would introduce another scene that has the potential to introduce the taint for the investigators, but it's not on people. I think it should. I think there should be an animal encounter because the Scott describes about how there are different ways that the investigators, as they're traveling into Blackwater Creek, there's a couple of different encounters, again all optional, that they could encounter some of the townsfolk who have information and could kind of guide the characters deeper into Blackwater Creek. But these humans are not tainted. They're not part of the conspiracy. They're
It's
not part of
like
the
a
cult.
veterinarian that kind of
Yeah, there's
travels
a
through.
traveling vet, and there's a drunk who doesn't drink the local whiskey. So he's not tainted. Um, but I think it would be another scene that you might want to do is have a wild animal that's been tainted, and I was thinking it could have been a tainted pig, but it also could just as easily be a tainted deer. But just have something that kind of comes out dashing across the road, because an encounter like that, again, thinking that this is a introductory scenario, so possibly a new keeper, most likely new players, that kind of scene has the opportunities to draw in skill checks, so the players can kind of get accustomed to doing different skill checks. You could have a spot hidden to see if you can properly identify the animal that's dashed out of the road and is about to strike this car. You could have a dodge or a drive auto roll to try and
Try to
lessen
dodge this thing. Yeah.
dodge the thing or lessen the damage that could be inflicted on your vehicle, because if the drive auto roll fails, then suddenly you end out with a vehicle that's been damaged beyond repair, or at least it's not drivable until you've done something like operate heavy machinery to fix it, you know? But you could even potentially have an introductory combat scene, you know?
Yeah.
And there's
Or
there's
even if it's
information,
tame, because you could make it something like a rabbit, but
right?
some freaky rabbit.
Yeah, yeah, like a
Where yeah, where because
there's the
the mother's
wizard
milk
Tim
is
nearby. Yeah,
this mutations. So it's this thing. Yeah, at first it looks like a rabbit, and then it's like no, it's got too many legs,
yeah,
and it's got a head on either end, or something. It's got the frog tongue. So either they hit it, and now we're trying to identify this thing, or like it kind of like zips past them, or they have to swerve the car. So it doesn't even have to be necessarily a combat encounter, or it could be, if you hit the rabbit or you hurt your car, or the deer you hurt your car, and then you have to be out there and you have to repair the tire, or whatever it is. You're out the side of the road. Well, that's when the grass, just something shuffling in the grass, and
there's
maybe it's something will
potential.
attack, maybe not.
Yeah, there's
But
potential clues that could be gathered if you're able to defeat it and keep the corpse. Right? You might be able to
yeah,
study the corpse.
and of course, because it's been so tainted, they can have it. We're just strange things are going on with it. So, the the massive worms that are writhing around inside of its organs, just something bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because this whole place is it's basically, it puts like life and evolution on like super fast forward, and this just these bizarre mutations are going on. Um, one of the things that we had with this one, I'd mentioned the art portion of it as being just kind of, I felt like I couldn't show any of the people, any of my players, the art, because it looked so advanced. Because at first, like when I was showing them the children, and I think I had one of the children smile, and the character made a spot, and I talked about they had all these kind of sores in their mouth, like around their teeth, and the player kind of had to like, but he rolled real well, and I talked about there was like a small like little worms looking like they were wiggling out of these sores in their teeth, and I remember the player's face was absolutely just revolted at this, because I
Nice.
think these kids were asking for something, and that was for our players this weird cue. One of them went and bought a bunch of Cokes, and he drank Coca Cola throughout the whole adventure. And I hadn't even got to the part where I revealed the water was bad. He was like, "I am not eating or drinking a single thing here," and he just did canned food. And some of the other players did, but he was like, "No." So when they went to the farmhouse, because the students had said that they had stayed at this one particular farmhouse, and they went to that farmhouse and they had to stay with the uh, people live there, and I think the mother, who's older, all her teeth have grown back. So one of the early stages, because there's 7 stages this tank, and the first two are really cool. Where like you minor injuries are healed, and like old scars might go away. And for our game, the adventure we had done uh, just before this was Edge of Darkness, and one of the characters had stuck her head up into the attic in Edge of Darkness, and that thing just about tore her face off. So she had these just horrible scars on her face from Edge of Darkness. So her appearance had dropped significantly from that attack. Next adventure we did was Blackwater Creek, and she got enough of the tainted water
She's
that
restored.
it did, yeah, because it talks about if on a on a luck roll, even old wounds or illnesses are healed, including possibly like regrowing lost body parts. So because she did Blackwater Creek, she left prettier than she entered.
That
Um,
is awesome.
so so the taint actually is kind of nice at the beginning, which is actually gives a false sense of like, oh guys, hey, check this out. Like maybe if I drink some more of this, more good stuff will happen. But after level two, the good stops and the bad very quickly um, picks up. But we did have that experience of, oh wow, your attractiveness has just gone from a 30 back up to a 60 or whatever it was. It was a big change
That
from
is
from the
awesome.
old scars. And so when we did it, I was trying to make the taint seem much more subtle. So it was little things like the comment from the farm woman about her teeth growing back, or like these little barefoot kids that were like killing worms and like beating each other up. Had the sores, and it's like, okay, yeah, they're little poor, dirty country kids. Maybe they would have sores in their mouth, and then it's like, well, they've got these little white, it's like a little grub or something that's like kind of wiggling in that hole, and they're like, oh God, just like that little step into creepy, but not enough for them to be like, oh my God, they're all monsters. Um, and then of course when we get to the farm, we have an encounter with a pig that has gone insane,
Mm.
Brutus. And then we watch kind of their local, alcoholic uh, kind of handyman or something of the farm who loses his mind to this because he's been drinking so much of the whiskey. So I enjoyed it, but I think it should be treated more as a slow burn. And because that's the biggest problem I had with the art is I couldn't show them the pictures. I could show them the maps. The maps look great, but the illustrations I felt uh, was like, okay, well I can't give you any of this. Well, of the ones that are supposed to be people, when you see the illustrations of the monsters, they're
Right.
flawless.
Yes, those are flawless.
Now, one of the other ones that I think you had mentioned before was a base of operations for the players.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And
it, I like the idea in scenarios to give the investigators someplace that they can use. They're having, whether it is a building or it's weapons, tools, you know, having resources, sometimes unexpected resources in your scenario available for the players is a fantastic boon. And well designed, I think well designed scenarios usually have something like that available for the investigators to use. And it even states in this scenario, in the very small, close knit, nearly non existent Blackwater Creek town, because the town consists of a general store, a church, and a few houses, a few, private residences.
mhm.
And one of those residences, which is located right next door to the church and directly across the town circle, directly across from the residence of the local, for loss of a better term, their lawman, their sheriff, or at least someone who's recognized as a lawman of a sort. This abandoned home, which I should point out, the investigators have no reason to believe that the home is abandoned. They just, for as far as they know, the homeowner just hasn't returned home, right? That she could return at any moment, because no one seems to be mourning her and no one is showing any concern for her. But when the investigators show up, they have no idea if she just simply went out into the woods to go hunting or something, and or whatever, and is about to come back. And so I don't feel like there's a really uh, plausible reason on why investigators would choose that house to
Uh,
use.
I think we can do it. Now, one there are two bases that are potential. One of them is really pointing out. The other is like a side note, but um, one of them is the Jarvie farm because the Miskatonic
Yes,
students, if they talk
that
to
one
them,
is much better.
and like they have events there. But the other one is as they're coming to town, there's this guy Hector Winnie,
Mm-hmm.
who is the father of one of the criminal
Yes.
pre-generated characters. So they could use that, but they don't have like a good relationship. So
Yeah,
it's
he's
not,
basically living in a lean-to though. It's not actually
yeah.
a house.
But when you were talking about the abandoned house there, because when I ran this, um, I don't believe uh, it's been a few years. I don't believe they ever even checked it out because there wasn't anything that really sent them there.
Well,
But
the vet, the traveling vet, he's the one who gives them a hint and says, "Hey, if you go check out Widow Hawkins, she's usually put people up." So the
oh,
traveling vet can send people there, but then you get to Widow Hawkins' house
it's just empty, and
and it's just
there's
empty.
like scratches and like a little bit of blood stains.
Yeah, yeah.
What I think would be interesting is kind of fast forward on one of the points I want to make about this one. So level 4 of the tank is you feel summoned to go to Blackwater Creek,
Yeah.
and because this has been shipped out with like the moonshine, I think eventually you start having like a flow of people coming through as they're drinking this and getting tainted. They suddenly start feeling the call, and they're coming any way they can. You know, they're hitchhiking or getting in their own cars or whatnot. And I like the idea of some local who's wanting to make a couple bucks renting her place to these newcomers that keep coming into town. So it's like, well, you know, we really don't have anywhere to stay. But I tell you what, I can give you a deal. And he rents them the house of this woman that they have already, you know, killed. Uh,
That makes great sense. I love that.
and because then you could have the sheriff show up and be like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" Because the player characters have no reason to hide. And they're like, "We, you know, so and so, you know, Hector Winnie told us to come here." And the sheriff's like, "Okay." You kind of get this uncomfortable thing. You might not kick him out, but it is like, well, she just died, and you paid him, didn't you? Yeah. It's like how much did he charge you to have you stay in a house that he has no say over? And you can have that sort of interaction where they end up getting allowed to stay there, but there is a tension, or maybe he does kick them out, but you realize he doesn't know how to lock the door. Maybe they could break in, but um, there's another way you could do it that would just be like, oh, you look like you need a place to stay, outsiders. Tell you what, for a nickel a night, I'll
Yep.
let you stay in my extra house.
I like that a lot. That is really cool. That's a very good pull to do that. You know, because again, you know, if you're going with the way that these encounters are written out, the sheriff is sitting on his porch. He's sitting in a rocking chair on the porch, shotgun leaning on the wall next to him, and he's just kind of observing what's going on as strangers come into town. And because this house faces, you know, Widow Hawkins' home, I'm like, who is going to just go into that house and try and set up camp with the sheriff looking right at you?
Yeah,
But I like the idea if there's someone who's like trying to pull a scam. That's a really great idea.
just you know the also add that little bit of local color to it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, eventually, because if they're doing the criminal one, there's nothing that would really send them to. There was the camp of the old expedition, which has basically been destroyed, and that is where the clues of what happened here are to found. As if they find the original camp and these kind of like fallen down tents, which of course they could use those tents. My characters looked at those and were like, "Oh hell no!" But um, and but that's actually where they could find it. And one of the things that did kind of make me kind of think this will be a little bit harder is if you are doing the bootleggers they don't really have a reason to check that part out.
No, I actually, and it does kind of give a little bit of a note in the scenario that the bootlegging angle, it it will or could feel like a more direct shot
Oh, it is. I
straight
mean,
to the danger, and you really don't have a reason or even foreknowledge to even check for other things that may have gone on to kind of get you in there, which is one of the reasons why. Um, well, all right. So my brain is kind of scattered here, but Scott has some excellent NPC backgrounds and kind of breakdowns on how a keeper could in embody some of these NPCs and use them. Now, one of the more fleshed out ones is the sheriff, and what's interesting is that the sheriff, he is very, again, this is going to be full of spoilers. The sheriff is in on the cult. He's in on um, uh, the creature that's manifesting and growing in the cave in the Earth's womb, and the sheriff was in on the sacrifice of Widow Hawkins and getting adding her to the monstrosity, and so the sheriff is basically opposed to the, is it Carmody or Carmody,
yeah,
Carmody, something like that, the brothers, and so in the kind of the notes that are given for the sheriff, it's all very focused on how does the sheriff react to the NPCs in how it plays out against the bootlegging brothers, because he's the sheriff is kind of hoping that the investigators will come in and basically take them out, take out the bootleggers. But what his NPC notes don't really describe is how he would, other than simply wanting to kill them and make them, well, not kill, he wants to capture them and then sacrifice them to the monstrosity if they have anything to do with uh, Rhodes, with the Miskatonic University angle and anything to do with that. And I would like to see maybe a little more variety with that. Maybe he tries to um, dissuade them or send them off into other directions to maybe kind of isolate him, because especially with investigators, they normally come in packs of 4 to 6 people,
yeah.
and that might be too many people for them to handle. And so I'd love to see something where, something described for the potentially novice keeper to lean on that will give them the ability to inhabit the sheriff and and figure out ways to separate and isolate these investigators. Get them to split up. He wants to encourage them somehow to, hey, why don't you split up? And maybe there's a lot of things going on with the university team. Maybe you should send a couple of your guys over there to check out that, and a couple other guys this way. And he might suggest ways to like divide and conquer. And then once the team of investigators become smaller groups, they
You make
become
us
easier targets. There is
and
strength in numbers.
and so, but one of the big risks with this one is anytime they eat or drink anything, we have this chance of the taint affecting them. And so part of it could also be, he just offers them some tea, or the real friendly of trying to do this. Now, one of the aspects that I did when I did this adventure is I had this cult that was growing the whole time. So in the town, it's mentioned there's a church and there's like the pews and people sit on them, and it doesn't really mention much other than the location. And I think it would be interesting if you had it where this church was now doing baptisms in the dammed off section where the creek is, or they're dunking people in this water. And so in mine, how that adventure went is we did the university. They went to the town. They did the farm. They found the camp. They found the cave, and where the woman has merged with this thing, and the water is flowing out. My description of it was a bit, I guess, graphic of the giant vulva that it was flowing out of because it was said to be like birthing monsters, and they could actually see this membranous wall, and the wife had actually grown to this bizarre mutated shape because she's basically going between basically kill me and this nurturing. She's in this kind of bizarre cycle of madness as she's talking to him, and the investigators hopefully will use the dynamite to take him out. We had a lot of trouble getting that luck roll to get that dynamite lit. That was like a long time before they did. And it was like, they have the character that's got the high luck, like, oh, I've got an 80. This will be no problem. And then we go for 4 rounds. It's like, statistically, this is getting less and less believable. And they're like, my stupid dice, but um, so they ended up blowing her up, and we lost a character. And at that point, the characters were actually so beaten down, like just absolutely brutalized, that they ended up just going to Dunwich and staying in Dunwich for a few days to get healed up because they still needed to find out what happened to this professor. Like their reason for doing it was still a town, so we had to fast forward like 2 weeks or something for them to be healed and return. And at that point, we had done most of the adventure, and I'm like, I don't know if I've got enough for a whole scenario or like a whole session. So that was when I brought in. There were hitchhikers on the way that had been tainted by this, and so they stopped to get a hitchhiker, and they see the sores in the mouth, which that kind of became their thing they look for. But when they got back to the town, that church had exploded in popularity. Like there was like revivals going on there. And how I had done it is the sheriff kind of became the cult leader. And because I took a lot of the elements, it's very Children of the Corn. So where the cross was on the front, it was actually like two bundles of like corn stalks that were together in a vulva shape. And
Mm.
they would do these sermons that were very about the mother. And so like parts of it were taken out of the Bible, but other was just kind of talking madness. And he was taking a lot of these newcomers to town and they were digging the cave back out because the player characters had destroyed it. And then also they had taken those enormous corn stalks and they had made they crucified the farmers that the investigators had stayed with because they had housed the investigators. So I had it when they returned to town. Things had escalated like drastically. They could not be seen in town. They were the people who blew up the cave. They were the people who had like all this bad stuff had happened. So they get there, and the population of Blackwater Creek has doubled with all of these newcomers, and they're very zealotish. And so now they had to sneak their way through to actually end up going to the bootlegger's farm, where they did everything, but they also had to go and smash the dam because the dam water was still there. They blew up the mother, but there was still a dam full of water. And in speaking like you brought up, these are probably newer, no supernatural experience. There was one encounter near the dam that I personally found a little hardcore, and that's the infant dark young.
Mm.
Um, Even as a toned down dark young man, I don't like throwing those up against characters. They are seriously, seriously nasty monsters. I think if I'm doing this as a one shot, I wouldn't have a problem. But when we were using characters that we want to repeat, I felt that one was a little bit. stronger than I was fully comfortable with. Um,
Yeah, in a situation like that, I might make it a creature that is just seen, just so you've got the experience of seeing it, but you're watching it sort of like that old Bigfoot footage where it's just kind of walking away in the distance, you know?
well, you had mentioned like the color out of space earlier, ages ago in this podcast, and what I like is that the plants are kind of moving
Mm-hmm.
because the roots have been soaking up this water, and eventually, kind of like when the Ints awaken, like some of them just started turning into these kind of infant dark young. They're like as much tree as they are animal now, and it's just that one is tough, man. I Dark Young are one of those creatures I absolutely love reading about. I love all sorts of stuff. I hate using them because it's like this is so. I feel like I'm sucker punching characters anytime there's a Dark Young that shows up because they are so powerful
So
and
brutal.
they're cool. They're really cool, but they're so brutal that I treat them like I do Shoggoths. These are like the ancient red dragon in D&D. I don't just casually toss one in.
Yep,
Uh,
yep, agreed. I like it. That's something else about this scenario that I like is the for the experienced player who might kind of come into this scenario, the depiction, the symptoms of the problem with the rotted smelling crops and things like that, and some of the mutations that we're seeing in animals and people. It has a very color out of space feel. And that's another beautiful, very subtle thing about this scenario is not that it's an intended switcheroo, but you could certainly initially think that it is one thing if you're if you're familiar with Lovecraftian monsters and the Lovecraft stories, you might think it's one thing, possibly a color, and then it ends up being something else
it's
entirely.
something very different.
Yeah,
I,
which
I,
I
I will.
love that. I love that. Kind of
So with those
back and
same
forth.
characters, when we ended up uh, we played him for a while. Then we ended up taking him to Call of Cthulhu, and we did Madness in London Town. It also involves the milk of Shub-Niggurath,
Mm-hmm.
and they find a guy goes mad. There's like a little bit on his lip, and when they smelled it, and it says like it smells like that. Remember that sweet sickly smell for Blackwater Creek? They're like, oh my god, like it was an absolute like we know what this is. We want like this is horrible, guys. This is worse than we thought it was going to be. And then years and years later, when we did Panacea, which is a modern day Call of Cthulhu game,
Mm-hmm.
the several of the players were both of those, and then we had one. It was this like, second Call of Cthulhu game ever. And when they realized that there was the milk involvement, they're like, oh no, not this. And they had to catch him up. It's like anytime we have ever smelled this stuff, it has been the most brutal, just nightmare scenario. It's like their characters don't know that, but that was a good one of tipping them off. So I we ended up actually referencing this one quite a bit years and years later. Is just how that was used. So, but I agree. It starts off very color out of spacey, especially the way the crops and the plants get mutated.
One of the things that is interesting that Scott Dorward did for this scenario is he provides pre-generated characters. Now, he does describe at the very beginning of the scenario about if your players are making characters to it should be a group effort. The players should talk to each other, and it should be a communal experience in the building of your team of investigators. He doesn't. I mean, that team of investigators could just as easily be a group of criminals as it would be a group of academics from Miskatonic University. So I mean, I guess it could be a missed opportunity that of your six, that there aren't 12 pre-gens, six bootleggers and six academics, but there are only bootleggers in the pre-gens. Did you find that helpful or hindering or?
Actually, the only part that really stuck out to me is the other adventure in that two adventure book is Miss Dues, and that one is actually only criminals. You're criminals to collect dues after a robbery, and it comes with six pre-generated criminals as well. And so I've talked to Scott about this. And basically, he wrote his, and Mike Mason wrote his, and they didn't know until they basically brought them together that they had both done the pre-gens with the criminal. Well, Mike's Miss Dues is only criminal, but Scott hadn't known that. Because I think it would actually have been a really cool opportunity in this book if, with the criminals, it could work with both. Because Miss Dues is very, very criminal, and it could be done with university people trying to recover an artifact, but that's a lot harder. And so I think if those pre-gens had been worked a little bit, so they could be used with both for Miss Dues, and then Blackwater Creek came with the Miskatonic ones. I think that actually would have been the perfect mix because that way, if you do play you actually have two adventures you can do
Yeah.
versus here's a group of six pre-gen criminals, here's another group of six pre-gen criminals. We have to do a little bit of mental hurdling to figure out how we could get them to do one than the other. I think if it had kind of had that kind of little polish of an edit to like, okay, we're going to change the scenarios enough that way they could literally roll right into each other with no effort, like their boss having the same name, that sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing already being done. That way we've only got six criminals, and then since we have 12 in the book, the other six would be the university. So small gripe, but I think that is just one of those little things that could have made a good thing better.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. So if they had planned ahead, they could have had all of the investigators in a centralized location instead of them being segregated out as these are for this scenario and these are for that scenario. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I get that. Get that. Well, all in all, um,
Oh, I love this adventure.
yeah, I do too. It's fantastic. And
And this was, I said, this is one of the earliest ones we did. I think this was my third one after we started seventh edition. Well, I did the haunting, but like as the full group, I think we did Dead Light, then we did Edge of Darkness, and I think this was our third. Uh, with that, and it ended up being the same group of characters. So made a huge impression. We had a lot of fun. Had two sessions out of it. They did what we basically the corn maze ride through Satan's cornfield, as they called it, because
uh
when
huh.
they decided to raid the bootleggers, um, they're going through it in like a stolen tractor or a truck. I don't remember, but they're basically dumping fuel out the back the whole way because they're going to burn this horrible cornfield. And there's all these things in it, which, of course, the big kind of mutated monster brother was in the cornfield. So I had it where they didn't face him yet, but the ended up shootout with the criminals was a really great time because we had this raging fire going on around them because they had, for some reason, as players do, decided to burn the cornfield before they raid the place in the middle of the cornfield. So there was this huge
We could
raging
always just run
fire,
in the other direction.
and they're in the barn and they're like ducking from the shotgun blast, and the side of the barn starts catching on fire. It's like full of booze. Like, we should probably get out of here. And they had to go to the house and they find where the professor is, and got out. But it was this very exciting fight because for some reason they said, you know what we should do? Let's add fire, because that's the most player character statement that's ever been uttered.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Our wounds just healed. We just got better looking. We should leave now before we get new scars.
Oh yeah. Oh, and like we said, we'd lost one in the cave, so like we had to bring in a new character for that adventure, and but it was a good time. We have a lot of memories from it, and so the little complaints that were very minor, but I think there are a few tweaks. I really like the idea of the shack being implemented. That's
That's a
or
really
the
cool idea. I
a
like that.
deer or a rabbit or something kind of leading in.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good one.
That's awesome. Well, we want to thank our patrons for supporting the show. This we really could not do this show without you. Um, we still have the poll that's going on to kind of decide which of our suggested ideas we're going to develop into a
How is it
Call of Cthulhu.
going? I haven't paid attention.
Um, it's a very tight race,
Okay.
but as it stands right now, my idea is preferred with a one vote margin.
Oh,
So,
I need to get on there and vote. I don't think I'm allowed to.
but if you're listening to this, you are allowed to come join our Patreon, and you can vote in the poll and figure out which scenario idea Seth and I work on and develop into a full-fledged scenario. To do that, go to www.patreon.com/modern mythos.
I say the Discord is also a good place. While the poll isn't there, where we did get some of our ideas by people having suggestions for us. So we do have an active Discord. That's also where any other just show ideas, any topics you want us to explore, or just ask us any questions. Go ahead, show up. We've got the Discord invite in the show notes, as well as there is a channel we have of people throwing out some ideas or suggestions of anything to do in this scenario once we're positive which of our two ideas we're going to expand on into the full thing.
Exactly. Also, you can watch this show on YouTube. Big thanks to Seth for that. He will edit this show with some really cool and fun slideshows, and this audio podcast becomes a pseudo video podcast on YouTube.
I know I feel shamed. I haven't done the last one yet. It's this week. So by the time it airs, it'll already be on YouTube.
There you go. There
But
you
right now, I'm like, John, you're shaming me.
go. It's the back door way of trying to get you to do it.
And also, we do have merchandise. T-shirts are available at our Redbubble store, which, of course, redbubble.com/people/modern mythos. And we've got a link down in the show notes where
Yeah,
to find
check it
that.
out. Get some t-shirts, get a mouse pad, get a mug, you know, get something with this our awesome Modern Mythos logo on it.
On Sumro art.
John Sumro art. And, last year we put together a pretty cool book of Mythos artifacts. And you can find that on Drive Through RPG. We've got a link in the show notes. Yeah, anything that you need, you can take these artifacts and insert them into your own Call of Cthulhu scenarios. And we can't do this show alone. We want to thank our amazing editors, Max Mohafa, Edwin Nagy, for all of their hard work, keen skills, and making us sound awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And we've already mentioned him, but we want to thank John Sumro for our badass logo. He is a very talented artist, so please, by all means, follow him on Facebook, check out his official website, and please consider joining his Patreon.
And finally, we want to thank the Darkest of the Hillside Thickets for generously allowing us to use their song Gluttony as our intro and outro music. And we've talked about them earlier today. If you're a fan of Lovecraft's writing and the Call of Cthulhu RPG, you really owe it to yourself to check out the Darkest of the Hillside Thickets. Please check out their Bandcamp site and their official band website. Links are in the show notes.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.